of people and wildlife, because that's not going to change as we increase our human population. So I'm excited to be here. It's going to be a little bit of a wild ride with the two of us. So I'll let Pam introduce herself and you'll start to get a feel for what's going on here today.
Fasten your seatbelts, everybody. Hi, my name is Pam Otto, and I work at the St. Charles Park District, which is also in northern Illinois. I'm right now coming to you. We're about 40 miles outside of Chicago, and I would say I'm about 20 miles from where Peggy is in her nature center. I've been working in nature education for the last 20 years, but very much like Peggy, whole life connected to the outdoors and to wildlife. And if there's one thing I've learned in that time, it's that it's a connection. It's not a separation where I go to visit wildlife as a visitor or a guest. I'm very much part of it. We're all very much part of it. And I hope that that's one of the takeaways you get from our stories that we have to share with you today, that we're not just observers of the wildlife around us, but we are very much a part of it as well.
Nice. So we'll get started. And what Pam and I wanted to bring today, we both get a lot of phone calls, emails regarding wildlife and how it interacts with humans. And a lot of times, I think Pam and I both agree, the animals are just doing what animals do, but people tend to take it personally. So what we offer you today are some insights to these animals, maybe a little bit about what happens when you participate in their life range and their habitat, and that coexistence with a lot of the wildlife is really possible. And we want to try managing to live with them before we just say they have to go, just because we're excited about them landing in our space. And as a very quick example of what I'm talking about, I get calls from people who will say, I had a chipmunk in my yard today. I'm like, oh, that's wonderful. And they'll literally say, what do I do about it? And I have to very politely say, how about you enjoy it? Well, what's it going to do? Well, how about, so we try to make a plan that we talk about what can be done if the chipmunk does naughty things. But I really try to encourage people to just enjoy wildlife when it offers you the opportunity to coexist with it. So as just a quick history, before we get too carried away, we have to remember we aren't what we look like today, no matter where you are, Ohio, Illinois, California, our landscape has changed over time. And that's not a bad thing. We are a part of nature. I hate saying that. We are nature. We are a species like any other species. Our focus is to adapt, to survive, to reproduce, and keep those generations going. It's like no other animal, because of our ability to think, to take care of things or destroy things. We have all these skills that sometimes aren't used for the right reason, but we didn't always look like this. You know, no matter where you are, the country had this choreography of pastures passing in these huge migratory herds, and then little specks of people started landing, but it was still a lot of nature. And then those little specks of people started to grow. And then the nature had to figure out either how to adapt, which is where we get a lot of our urban wildlife, or it had to move out. And yeah, a lot of things, I know where we are in Illinois, a lot of things felt that pressure and said, you know what, we can move out. They didn't go extinct. They extirpated. They walked away. Lack of habitat, lots of pressure with the new European settlers on top of Native Americans, the hunting pressures. Some of them left. Others adapted very well. And especially humans. Humans adapted extremely well. And as you look at this picture, there's mountains back here. I don't know where this is from. There's green space. And as Pam will add in any moment, this water can get into this, but this is row crops. This isn't any kind of biodiversity, any kind of helpful space. You know, there might be a yard down in the left corner with the farm that might have more things going on than any of this, but you can see this encroachment. Is it wrong? No. Humans need a place to live because we are a species in nature. But some people will look at this and feel like they're giving back to what we call nature and think that's good enough. And really, there's not a lot here. This is a desert of biodiversity. And they've moved on. Or the animals that can adapt, that will come up here later in our discussion, will use that space. But it won't be the variety of animals that could be there. This looks beautiful. Pam, give me the word that we were using earlier, because you know my brain.
Peggy, that looks like a monoculture to me.
Thank you. See, Pam and I are of the same age. We aren't going to talk about it, but we have to help each other with words, right? So the monocultures, those singular things, they're not helpful. Does that pasture grow plenty of food for a dairy farm? Possibly. The lawns in the housing area down below, water will race off of that. It's sod. It's not penetrable. It looks like it is, but it takes a long time for water to get through sod. So the water's going to race off and maybe even if there's a low spot, flood that field. But there's not enough biodiversity to sustain animals. Pam, what else do you have on this picture?
Well, Peggy used a key word of flooding. And I know from our human perspective, the last thing we want to hear about is a flood, because to us, flood means damage and destruction. We're going to lose the things that we've stored in our basements. Our precious mementos are going to be ruined by a flood. But in nature, it's a natural process, just as drought is a natural process. Sometimes there's some years where we don't get any rain. Animals and plants that have co-evolved over many, many millennia are used to that. Some won't survive, but the species generally will. And the same with floods. I know here in St. Charles, we had an awful lot of rain last spring. And I went out to check one of our parks. It's actually a wetland park. And the centerpiece of that park is a marsh. I wanted to see if the marsh was doing its job of absorbing that excess water. It was, but there was still a lot from all the neighboring, the neighborhoods nearby, the roofs, the sidewalks, the driveways that were shedding that water. The marsh it needed some time to absorb that excess. Well, I walked past the plant and I thought, this was early in the season. This was early May. I thought, what plant would already have seeds on top of it? And then I looked more closely. It was an ant colony. They had felt the inundation of the water coming in and they escaped to the tops. And there must have been 1,000 ants clinging to the tops of these little reeds and grasses that were near the marsh. So to them, it was just a little inconvenience that they had to get out of the way of, but it's part of the life cycle of a marsh. Flooding is something that, again, from a human perspective, we tend to think of it negatively, but it's, and some of the things we've done to our land have made flooding much more likely because we've taken away the ability for soil to absorb water. But it's a natural process. And
that's like if any of you on this call are in a school in DuPage County, DuPage floods almost every spring, the county, but the county is a wetland by soil type. But sometimes people think that, oh, I know it's wet soil, but I'm going to build my house and it's my house, so it'll be fine, right? So we have to really honor nature, honor the soil type, honor where the water has to go. There's people that get paid a lot of money to engineer water away from people. And that takes a lot of knowledge and a lot of ability because in the long run, water wants to go where water wants to go. So we sometimes get frustrated with nature when really we should be frustrated with ourselves and our unwanting to ebb and flow, if I can say that, bad pun, with nature. Here's an example really quickly, and we're just about to go into our main conversation. This is a small forest preserve in Cook County. There's a pair of coyotes that have this as their territory. It's not big enough to feed them. Where do they eat? They've adapted, and they eat the mice and rodents all through these neighborhoods and down through these industrial areas. They are fully capable of raising a litter of pups every year just on this small green space, as long as at night. And coyotes aren't necessarily nocturnal, but they've become nocturnal in Cook County to avoid running into people because they're not impressed with us either, right? So they take off and they'll hit these, and they're not out eating garbage. They're eating the animals that are coming for our garbage. And you'll see that later, what else they're eating that we tend to hand them.
There was another coyote, Peggy, you probably heard of it. And again, Cook County is the county that Chicago is in. So we're talking about a very large, highly populated county here in Illinois. She was known as the IKEA coyote because she lived in the retention pond that was built when they built this big IKEA building and the parking around it. And she did fine for a number of years. keeping a low profile during the day in the wetlands surrounding that retention pond. And then, as Peggy said, going out at night and foraging for not necessarily the garbage, but the things that come to eat the garbage.
A great project is the Urban Coyote Project. It's the longest ongoing coyote research project run by Chris Anker in Cook County. And one of the things he was saying along with the IKEA was there was another male coyote that it was one of theirs that was tagged, and he was hanging out near a medical building is where his territory was. And they would be watching him at night because they had grad students, keep an eye on things. And these two people would come out for their evening break in the dark, a man and a woman that both worked there, and they would be taking their walk break. And every night they literally passed the coyote on the sidewalk, and the coyote would step off the sidewalk into the grass, and they'd keep walking, and they finally couldn't take it. And they finally stopped and explained who they were one night, said, "Do you ever see any animals while you're out here?" And they're sitting there like, "Nope, nothing." And then one of them said, "Yeah, well, there is that one stray dog that walks by every night when we're out here." And nobody ever was harmed. Nothing ever, everybody was very, the coyote very graciously gave the sidewalk, and nobody, nothing happened. They're out there. Animals aren't random. They're out there living. And if they have what they need, they will, if they can, they'll adapt. If not, and that's where we have some of our changes in those animals, and they may move on.
You guys, you'll probably hear this term again. Peggy, I love your phrase, animals, wildlife is not random. They're showing up in an area, you can bet there's a reason for it. We might not at a glance understand what that reason is, but and that's really the main goal of our talk with you today. If you can learn a little bit about the animals and their behaviors and what drives them to do what they do, it's going to make that coexistence so much easier.
Yeah,
understanding definitely what it is that they're up to.
So here we are. That is not Pam, nor is it I, although we're heading that way.
I don't know. Yeah, my COVID hair is starting to look an awful lot like that.
So here we are together with wildlife, and we're going to start in with some things that we're getting. Like I said, she and I both get tons of phone calls and emails, and sometimes we're talking people off the ledge that are truly, truly concerned, and if they're reaching out, we take advantage of that as an educational moment. The more we educate people, the less conflict that they will have with those around them. So I'm going to
once they understand, they can appreciate.
Yes.
What we're looking at right here is something that people were not understanding here in Northern Illinois. And actually throughout much of the northern part of the United States. I think we were all, when we were young, we were taught to believe that when a robin shows up, that spring is coming. Robins are a sign of spring. And yet all winter long, we've been seeing robins. They never left. Now, some of them do. Robins are not a bird. In fact, you guys will get a kick out of this. Their scientific name, every species has a scientific binomial, a two-word name that is universal around the world. If you use the scientific name, everybody's going to know what you're talking about. If we were to just say robin today, there's actually a European robin that's a very different species. But if I say Turdus migratorius, you're going to know that we're talking about a thrush that in theory migrates. Now, robins have never been long distance migrators. We have some birds, some of our warbler species, some of our insectivore species that will breed here in North America, but then they will fly to South America to spend the winter. Robins have never, ever done that. They will go where they need to go to find food. And in this case, there's actually a lot of food still here. Now, our human perspective, we think, well, why wouldn't they want to fly somewhere warm for the winter? Half my friends have flown somewhere warm for the winter. They're in Florida, they're in Texas, they're in Arizona. A robin flying somewhere warm is undergoing a lot of stress to do that. They're going to have wear and tear on their bodies. Those little wings are going to have to take them there. Sometimes it's just easier to stay here. The cold is not the reason they leave. They leave to find food. And look at those robins there on your screen on the left. They're sitting on food. They're sitting on berries. Robins don't just eat worms. Berries are very much a part of their diet. They don't have to leave to find it because it's here. So that's what I've been spending my time. I don't know about you, Peggy, but I've got a lot of phone calls, a lot of emails explaining to people they're here because they didn't leave. Or
Well,
if they did arrive here, maybe they're just visiting from Wisconsin because they flew.
right? As long as they have open water too. So food and open
Yep.
water are the key. And a lot of our farm tiles are still, when these in between the snows and the cold, when they melt and there's drainage. I know here where I'm at, we have backwater that stays open quite a while. But the
Yes.
interesting thing is we deal with people who are very angry at wildlife. And then I don't know about you, Pam, but this last week they're like, how do we save them? How do we help them
Yes.
survive? I'm like,
This, how
just
is this
leave them
bird? How is this
alone.
little bird gonna know what to do?
So people tend to have that, also that need for care, and I'm seeing it a lot more during COVID. There's this, during the virus times, there's this intense need to care for something. And
Mhm.
I finally have told people, if you really want to spend money, put some dried fruit on a cookie sheet, but bring it in at night, because everybody's going to want dried fruit that lives in the wild. But they're panicking that these birds have shown up and think that they flew back too soon, and they don't understand they never left. So
Remember, it isn't random. These robins, there's a reason why they're here.
they don't have it out to just freeze to death for no specific purpose.
Well, and speaking of that need to care, Peggy, how many of us put bird feeders out? Yeah, Peggy. I'm actually going to take my hand down. I stopped feeding the birds a number of years ago. Not so much for this particular reason. I was fine feeding the squirrels. What I wasn't so fond of was the mice that were coming into my house because they had been drawn to my yard by the birdseed. We'll get to that in just a second, but this is another common complaint we get here at our offices. I'm feeding the birds. Why are the squirrels there? How do I get rid of the squirrels? The squirrels have crashed the party. And honestly, they have every bit of, they have as much right to be there as the birds do. It's free food. If you think of feeding the birds as issuing an invitation to a party, but you go ahead and do that. But then also remember, you can't control your guest list. You don't know who's going to show up. And believe me, especially in the wintertime in a northern climate where things get chilly, you're going to get an awful lot of guests coming to your party. Squirrels are probably the most creative in the ways that they are able to figure out. You can put what's called a baffle up to try and keep a squirrel from climbing up to your feeder. Well, then they'll just jump from the top and come down, or they'll shoot over from the side from a branch. These are foods that they can be part of their diet, although sometimes if a squirrel eats too much bird seed, they need a little more diversity in their diet than just seed will give them. But that squirrel there on the right that's feeding on suet, suet is it's a fat, and that squirrel is nourishing its body and it's getting what it needs to be able to stay warm in these cold temperatures.
And high cholesterol.
Yeah. Look at this. Look at who loves to come to the bird feeders. And again, people tend to look at their feeders, their bird feeders, and they get angry that other creatures are coming to it. But it's not random. These wildlife are coming there for a reason. Chipmunks will come in and fill their pouches full of food. And that, by the way, happens when it's a little warmer out. Right now, I think most of our chipmunks are underneath the ground, but they will load up as much as they can possibly carry. When the chipmunk comes to a bird feeder like that, it's kind of like it's making a trip to a Sam's Club or a Costco. It's buying in bulk. It's taking home as much as it possibly can. And people say, well, but I spent good money on that seed for my birds. Well, it's not just for the birds.
It's definitely a diverse food source, right? So I love having guests over when we're in a healthier time. And I can't imagine, calling everybody that knows Pam and I, but not, and then telling Pam she can't come. I mean, who does that? You have to share something that'll make some of you, I would think it's hilarious. I found out there were some older gentlemen in my area, and I happen to know one of them that were doing something. One, you have to be very careful. A lot of people want to trap and move animals, and that can spread disease. The stress that would put on an animal, that would be like somebody walking in your house and going, I like your house, and put you in a moving van and take you away. And then you have to figure out how to find everything you need to survive with nothing other than being let out of a box, right? So there are legalities, and that's very important to know. And I found out these older gentlemen, seniors, didn't want squirrels at their feeders, and they were trapping them, live trapping, and hauling them away and letting them go. But before they would let them go, they would spray paint their tail because they were just sure they were finding their way back to their yard and wanted to know which colors were finding their way. Okay, that not only could harm them chemically, but more importantly, if you're a squirrel, you have predators. And if you're squirrel and you're flagging a big, chartreuse tail, that's just not fair. That's like you're putting up just a please eat me because life is over sign. Oh, and Pam has something to share on
Yeah,
that.
I don't know if you guys, I know we're screen sharing. If you can see what we're doing, otherwise I can show this later. This is a taxidermy mount of a black squirrel. We actually have a pretty large population of black squirrels in this area, and this one unfortunately was hit by a car. That tail is pretty important. That bushy tail that squirrels are known for is important. It's vital to its winter survival because that's its blanket, that's its umbrella, that's its winter it's its blanket that it can snuggle up in on a cold night to stay warm. And you gum it up with spray paint, it's not going to be able to survive.
Yeah.
Your analogy, Peggy, of moving into a new neighborhood,
Nothing.
animals that are released in an unfamiliar environment are going to meet up with a lot of angry neighbors. There's
Yeah.
some territory issues involved there too.
I had a gentleman bring out a caged skunk one time in his trunk and release it, and that's very illegal because they can carry diseases and then kill the population I would have here. But worse, it was in his car, and when he left, you could still smell the skunk as he drove by. So there's a lot of reasons not to do that. So I added a fun slide because when you set the table, you're going to set the table at many levels. And this is our second to final food slide. I get so many calls about there's hawks eating my birds. And I've heard my neighbor, who is a lovely retiree from a seed company, yell words that I don't say at hawks because they're coming after her birds at the feeder. And she has a slingshot. And she's just this sweet woman who goes screaming through the yard. I go in the house because I don't know where she's shooting that slingshot. But again, diversity is how the world works. These hawks, if you don't want hawks to take your birds, then don't feed them. I feed the birds still. I feed them. I have cats, indoor cats that are fully entertained. I find that feeding the birds and studying them up close, I appreciate that. I see who comes. I don't spend a ton of money. I just do one kind of food. But it does change the dynamic. How many birds are living through the winter on feeder food at my feeders that wouldn't necessarily still be in that breeding pool of that species if I, didn't feed them. The other thought is they'll be, they can eat on their own. And that's how natural selection works to preserve a species. I could be doing more harm than good for a species because I might be saving the birds that wouldn't succeed, and that might add to the breeding pool in the spring and bring down the ability for those birds to survive in the overall picture, if that makes any sense. But when I get calls about hawks, this is what I think people see, this harrier, because there is a bird of prey called a harrier. So that's my sad day. So only Pam and I probably are going to be laughing about that one for the day. But some people really see hawks and truly have this hate for them, but you can't not invite everybody when you invite somebody. Again, the hawks aren't random. They have figured out that where there's food, there's eaters, and they eat those eaters, right? The food chain. So keep that.
And a hawk is a bird.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
It's really just feeding the next level up.
And a cardinal and a sparrow all taste like chicken, All right.
Peggy, what do we have here?
What do we have here? It's just a coyote, people. My all-time favorite animal.
But wouldn't you say, Peggy, that these are some of the most feared and most hated animals that we hear about?
Yeah, I don't understand. That's how, look at how they hunt. They hunt like a fox. There's a lot of our media and people who want to make things negative will use drama to terrify us and use programs that are fearful sounding to draw our attention. I do a coyote program. It's just called Coyote. I think I've done it for this actual group presentation that we're doing today. these animals are the most adaptive. We don't like, as humans, we don't like things that are smart. It freaks us out. I love things that less people like because I'm really selfish and it makes it more mine. I love coyotes. I love them because they're intelligent. Am I concerned about them if I met one on one? Not necessarily, but it would raise my hair, right? Because I'd be like, oh, a coyote, right? They're not out there. They don't know we care. They don't know that they bother us when they walk past the fence at 2 o'clock in the morning. When my big dog wanted to go out the other night at 2 in the morning, he's a Malamute mix. He was hot. And I sat in a chair and watched him cool off in the snow. And then right before I brought him back in, this coyote walked behind my fence, just kept going about his business. My dog sniffed the air and knew he was there. Nobody was harmed. Everybody was happy. They didn't bark. They didn't howl. They're just existing. Their diet is intense and it doesn't include humans at all. And they just want to go about their business to be a species, right, amongst the rest of our species. And they're just super adaptable. And there are more, as Pam was saying, Chicago is in Cook County. There are more coyotes in Cook County than probably any other county in Illinois because their life range, their habitat, is being met in a smaller space. They're getting food and water and shelter in a smaller space. We're out here where I live in an agricultural world. They have to have a lot more acreage as a territory in order to get enough food. One of the urban coyotes was hit by a car. In the stomach of one city coyote were 11 rodents, and 4 of them were full-size city rats, bite and swallow. That's not a terrifying. He is a predator. He's not an apex predator. We don't have any left in Illinois. Apex predators are top of their food chain. Wolves, cougars, bears, those guys. We don't have them. Our food chain's all messed up, right? But these guys get to fill a huge hole because we're also encouraging rodent populations with our bird feeding, and our agricultural world and industrial move. We have opened up the path. And a lot of these animals that are fully adapted to human areas have come that way because of us. We've created everything a coyote is today, and yet we're fearful.
And in Cook County, how many millions of dollars are spent on rodent removal, rat eradication programs? Chicago, always talking about, we got to get rid of the rats. Here's the animal that's built to do the job. There's actually firms that sort of trade on people's fear of coyotes. They plant this idea. They saw it on the news the other night. They had a gentleman saying, coyotes are killers. If you look at it as you need to kill something to eat it, then we're killers too. But he was using that fear basically to build his own business. And the coyotes, which is not to say we don't have animals go rogue sometimes. If someone is out there putting food, these animals will become defensive of a food source that they feel is going to help them, and they're going to want to protect that. That can sometimes lead to some conflicts that are not good. Again, it's not the animal simply reacting to something a human has done.
Yeah, so we don't leave out pet foods. We don't leave out, garbage has to be sealed because you don't want to draw them to you, because if mice are coming to your garbage, that's going to draw those that eat the mice. The other thing I was thinking of, and we didn't talk about this, Pam, but here's a very important word you need to understand and know, and that is ecological service. So everything from pollinating insects to coyotes give us an ecological service. We don't pay for it, and it's worth billions of dollars annually. We don't give them credit for that. We only give them credit for things that make us upset or worried. There's not a single coyote going past my yard going, yeah, I don't like her. They don't even know we exist. They don't know
Smack down.
Yeah, and they don't know we care. Here's something Pam can go over, this lovely list, because they do eat some strange things. They're very omnivorous.
Yeah, they and look at that term there, omnivore. It's they eat a variety of things, and especially at this time of the year, the diet is heavily skewed towards rodents and rabbits because that's what's available. That's going to give them the calories that they need. They're burning a tremendous amount of energy to stay warm, and so the protein and the fat in those animals is going to help them with their survival. But you know what? When here in Northern Illinois, June is berry season. We get mulberries, we get raspberries. We find coyote scat that's all berry seeds. we get into fall and the apples and the plums and the pears are ripe, they're going to be eating those then too. So their diet does change seasonally. And they're also what we would call opportunistic. They're not going to say, you know what, I have a taste for a rabbit today. I am not going to eat until I get a rabbit. If they're, out looking around and they come upon a rabbit, they might try to take it, but they're not going out specifically for that. And it's the same with, now in this area, and I'm sure it's true of other regions as well, people think of coyotes as being the pet killers. Like, oh, they're going to take my dog, they're going to eat my cat. There's a whole other side to that story, and some of it has to do with where they're at in their life cycle, their annual life cycle. February in Northern Illinois is the time that coyotes breed. So in the time leading up to this, and actually even still now, they're going to be very concerned about what's in their the territory that they're going to be raising their young in. And if they see something threatening, they're going to try and get it to go away.
One of the things I talk to people about coyotes too, because I had at one time 2 small dogs, a wiener dog and the dog I still have, which is a terrier, little terrier. And I always told people, and I have a fenced in yard, but coyotes could clear my fence with no problem. And I live by a field. And I always say, I know exactly who's going to go down by coyote when I let my dogs out at night, because that little wiener dog would go out and she'd slowly lurk toward the edge, to the edge of the patio, and she would listen, silent, stealth silent. She'd get her front feet off the patio and she'd piddle all over the patio. She wouldn't even get in the grass, and she'd back up, not touch anything, and race in the house. She knew things could get her. The terrier out into the quarter acre of fenced in darkness, for no reason. When you are a canine and you are a wild canine and you hunt for your food in the dark to avoid humans, and you make a noise, an obnoxious noise, and scare the food away, somebody's going to let you know about it. They'd have done that to their own coyote children. If a coyote child was out there doing that, they'd bite them and tell them to be quiet. So many of the dogs that get bit aren't dead. If a coyote wanted those small dogs you see on the news dead, you would never find the dog, because a canine habit, whether it's a fox or a coyote, they grab something and run home with it, right? They grab it, run. If it's small enough, they grab, swallow, and go to the next thing. They just want it to be quiet and to honor canine rule, right? So we have to quit anthropomorphizing what animals are thinking, because we have no idea. This next slide I put in, Pam let me put it in, live in the old days.
I love this.
That's Miss Peggy. That would be me.
Baby Peggy.
A young Miss Peggy, not a yucky Miss Peggy. But I did this because of size. This is an overfed, imprinted coyote I worked with after college. If you get a chance to do an apprenticeship of any kind, that's when you learn a lot. And this animal liked 2 people, and I was blessed to be one of them. He couldn't be let go from the rehabilitator because he would approach people, which would be bad. But I'm just squatted down onto one knee. These animals aren't massive. And in the winter, they look bigger because they get lots of hair on them. But everybody will come in and say, I saw this 3-foot tall coyote. I'm like, no, you did not. But, our imagination can get the best of us when we're frightened. But I just wanted that to show you. And this is by no means saying make a pet out of any wild animal. I still had to watch myself with him because he would decide whether I was his significant other that day or not. And we had an agreement. The tail stayed down. And if it didn't, I would tackle him. That was it. It was over. But I tell you, you learn more with research than you do just reading, right? So if you get involved with wildlife of any kind, the research will tell you a lot more information than just what your head and your heart think. There you go, Pam.
Well, sharing the journey. I'm not often the first one out on my block. This is the neighborhood that I live in. You can see it's very suburban. And what should have walked down the street on a snowy morning? Those are coyote tracks going right down the middle of the sidewalk. There's no blood in its wake. There's no hunks of fur. It's not dragging, kicking and screaming pet away. It was just out doing its morning patrol. I was thankful to see it. I was glad to know it's there.
Did your dogs know it was there?
My dogs are very unaware sometimes. No, they didn't. If they knew, they didn't tell me.
Right. Yeah, I know when the coyotes howl at night where I'm at out in the field in the summer when the windows are open, the families, every coyote sounds like 3 or 4 coyotes. So you don't have as many as you think. And they light up, and that Malamute of mine loves to howl. And he
Mhm.
will go to a window that's open and start howling. And it's like you hear like, and he'll go, oh, and they'll go, huh,
Yep.
nothing, nothing. Like,
The
what?
big guy speaks.
He's 110 pounds, and I think somehow that comes through his voice because they just get super quiet. And then if you go outside with flashlights, don't recommend, right? But they're not out to get me. We go outside with flashlights and we shine them in the field, and all you see are these little green blinking eyes. Like, who's that? It's social fun for those of us nerds in the wildlife world, right? There you go.
Well, so just briefly, I had an experience this summer. I was out walking my 3 dogs on a very warm summer night. It was right before 4th of July. And my dogs kind of went on alert. And we stopped and listened. This was kind of late at night. Miss Pam likes to walk around, 11 o'clock.
Lurk around.
Cooler. It was cooler. It was a very hot day. It was cooled off by then. And so we went out. I heard this, after we stopped, I realized what the dogs had keyed in on, and it was this high-pitched chattering, kind of like, and I thought, what? Where? I think I recognize that sound, but where is it coming from? It was coming from a storm drain in the street, and down there was a little, say, teenage-sized raccoon, and it had smelled us and was reacting to a potential threat in its area. Sometimes people see raccoons in storm drains and they think, oh my goodness, we have to rescue it. It's fallen in there. And now granted, sometimes they get stuck. Sometimes there's big fat raccoons that get wedged in the grate, and that is the sort of animal that would need some help. But in this case, it was on its way from one spot to another. A lot of municipalities, a lot of cities, a lot of towns, storm drains are a safe means of passage for a lot of different kinds of wildlife. Now, if it was during a heavy rain, those storm drains would not be safe. They'd be too deep. The current would be too strong. But on a hot summer night, there was just a little bit of water in there. That's a place for a raccoon, a muskrat, a mink, an opossum. They can walk through town and not have to worry about getting run over. So they've learned that. They've adapted their behaviors to know that something that we look at as a sewer, which it's not a sanitary sewer. These are just means of getting the rainwater to the nearest waterway. It's a great place to walk around and not get run over by a car.
Yeah, definitely. A little underground subway for wildlife. I see a Pixar movie coming now. What is that, Pam?
So that's my bicep, or what I call a bicep. It's my upper arm. And 2 years in a row, I'd be out working in my garden, and I would come in, and a few hours later, I would just get this intense, like burning itch on the top of my arm. And I would look, and it would be hot and red and swollen. And the itch would last for days. And I'd show this to people, and the first thing they'd say is, oh, you got bit by a spider. And the first thing I'd say is, no, anything but a spider. I tell you guys, spiders get blamed for every kind of random bite, with the possible exception of maybe mosquitoes in the summertime. People will come to me and they'll say, oh yeah, you know what? I was sleeping and I woke up and I had this spider bite here. There's lots of things that live around humans that will make a little mark like that. We have mites that live in our beds. I don't want to get you too out, but there's little things that we can't see that are there performing ecological services. They're eating our dead skin flakes. And there's slightly larger creatures that eat them. And sometimes they will try a little nip on us as well. But the spiders we have throughout much of the country. Now, I know, when I say the word spider, you probably get a certain image in mind of a creature with 8 legs and fangs and venom. We do have some spiders that have what we would call a medically significant venom. These aren't them. The brown recluse and the black widow spider, yes, they have a potent venom. It's not meant for humans. And in fact, a lot of those images you may have seen on the internet of a horrible darkened wound. There's, gross things oozing out of the skin. The skin itself is dying. The tissue around the bite is dying. That may well be not the venom itself, but a secondary infection that occurred from, a lot of times those are staph infections, flesh-eating bacteria that gets in the wound. So if you do have black widow spiders or brown recluse spiders in your area, be aware of them. But I tell you, I lived here in my office for over a year with a black widow spider and a brown recluse spider in little aquariums because I wanted to observe their behaviors. When I would feed them every week, I'd give them little crickets. They didn't run towards my hand and try to bite it. They ran away because the brown recluse is reclusive and the black widow likes to be by herself. Mm-hmm. So I'm fine. You need a little spidey sense. And the vast majority of spiders in the United States are not, their venom is not harmful. It's just there to subdue the prey that they take. Now, you're looking at the spider on the left and you're thinking, well, gosh, Ms. Pam, those are some mighty big fangs. That's actually a spider it's called a woodlouse spider. Another name for woodlouse is roly-poly. Those little amphipods, the sow bugs and pill bugs that live underneath rocks. That's where I found this spider, was underneath a rock, but I thought it was so cool. I brought it indoors and took a picture of it before I put it back.
Of course you did.
Of course I did. Well, and the same with the cute little guy on the left. That's a jumping spider that was in the basement. I think of jumpers as the teddy bears of the spider world. They have 8 eyes, but they hunt by sight. They don't spin a web. In fact, the woodlouse spider doesn't spin much of a web either. They ambush their prey. They need those large eyes in order to be able to see their prey. When I tried to take a picture of the jumping spider, it didn't jump towards me. It actually was trying to back away from me because I was the biggest bug it had ever seen. And
how big are they? With
this particular one was about the size of my pinky nail.
The jumping spider?
Yeah, the jumping spider, so the size of my fingernail. That wasn't big at all. The woodlouse spider, that body length was about, I would say 1.5 centimeters, maybe 3/4 of an inch.
Yeah, Miss Pam likes spiders. Miss Peggy respects them.
Yeah.
That's where I'm at. I don't harm them, but I definitely don't hang out long enough to think about that. I love what they do for me, right? They get all
they talk about ecological services. They consume insects, and they will consume insects that can be harmful to us. They spin their webs, and they'll take what they can get. I think they're fabulous little creatures that are just very, very misunderstood.
I've had some that look like they ate a mouse in my basement. They were I'm not stretching the truth.
They're not random.
Yeah, which is like, well, how long does it live down there? Because it was really big. Yeah, I should have called you because it was too big enough that when you let it go outside, you could see it running across the yard.
The grass was falling down.
Big spider. I made the guy that came to price a window take it out for me. I said, can you do me a favor since you're here? Like, in that jar, there's a big spider. Could you take it out? He goes, he's a big guy. And he goes, whoa, that's a really big spider. I'm like, I'll hold the door.
Well, Peggy, I'm glad you mentioned taking spiders outside in the summertime. Fine. In the winter, we actually have spiders, guys, that are adapted to living indoors, and that's where they belong. Now, this one is probably would not still be here had I not brought it in. I got to tell you, I called her dining room spider. She was living in between the windows of my dining room, between the window and the screen. She did not do well at all this summer. I actually replaced my windows recently, so she wasn't getting a lot of food. I don't know how she got in there. She must have been very small when she first climbed in. She had eaten about 3 bugs over the course of the whole summer. She was thin, she was dark. She probably wasn't going to survive. So I thought, I wonder what would happen if I brought her in. So I actually had her living in an aquarium on my dining room table since last October. I find insects in my house for her to feed on, and she's been doing just fine. I will add that Miss Peggy has not come over for dinner or anything else, partially because of COVID, but I think
COVID, it's all because of COVID.
because of, yeah, not the dining room spider.
The dining spider. No, I'm
But
not.
no, they are very helpful, and those ecological services they provide cannot be matched. One of the problems I hear from people who say they want to spray for spiders, sometimes when you're spraying for spiders, you're not just killing the spider. A lot of insecticides are what we call broad spectrum. So you may be spraying thinking I'm going to get rid of this one thing, but you're actually killing everything else too.
Well, and it's a chemical in your world. So you're a species in your house.
Yeah.
And let me assure you, I do go to Miss Pam's house and she's not bug ridden. All of our homes have something. That's
Yeah.
just how it is. If you look close enough, you'll find something. But
Mhm.
yeah, spraying chemicals, even with my huge respect for spiders, is not worth my health to mass spray or bomb my house with chemicals. It's just not something I can agree with doing to my son or myself.
Yeah.
Then there's these guys. What in the heck?
What the heck? These are not spiders. Now, how many of you have heard that the daddy longlegs is the most venomous creature on the planet, and the only reason we're able to survive around it is because it can't bite humans? Well, first of all, these are not actual spiders.
Yep.
A true spider will have two main body parts, this kind of combination head and thorax called a cephalothorax, and then another section called the abdomen. Its 8 legs are connected to the first part of the body. When we look at this creature, you look at the picture there on the right, how many body parts do you see? There's the 8 legs. Actually, this one might be missing a leg or two. It's supposed to have 8. It is an arachnid. It is not a spider. And these guys make their living on not so much feeding on other live creatures, but cleaning up. I find them sometimes in spider webs, eating off of the exoskeletons of insects that spiders have consumed. They're more scavengers than they are predators. And there's this, in the next photo, you'll see that it's gleaning what was left behind at an acorn. So again, not highly venomous, not dangerous at all. In fact, food for a lot of birds. A lot of birds will feed on these because they're relatively safe for them to bite them. They don't have hairs. Some spiders are very hairy, and birds will find those hairs are irritating to their mouth or their eyes. These hairless little delicacies, they pick the legs off of them and they have a nice meal of protein. What else do we got, Peggy?
So we want to be sure that we explain to you that we aren't saying that, save them all. We're just trying to encourage people to first think about coexisting with something. Think about, I don't let go as many spiders as I used to because Pam is a dear friend and she loves them so much. I'm trying to find that feeling as long as they're where I need them to be. But there are times when we create the problem ourselves. So if you look at the nuance, that cute little raccoon in that big dead tree, that's where they belong. That's where they should be nesting into, not in your roof. But because we are in this world of mowing our grass short and planting everything in a one plant environment, and we find a tree that's rotten, it looks ugly in our mind and we want it down. If it's not going to fall and hurt someone or hurt a building, if you leave it up, it'll serve more animals and more wildlife and keep them in their own life range, and they won't come shred your home to find a home, right? We create so much of our own problems with wildlife, or we assume how they think. We cannot know. There's no way for us to know. And like Pam said, if it's there for a reason. It's not random.
Peggy, I learned, Miss Peggy and I have a good friend, Miss Laura, and she actually had this exact damage on her roof where a raccoon had dug in. It was a female raccoon. She was looking for a place to den up and have her babies. And you might think, oh my gosh, look at what that raccoon did to that roof that is clearly targeting that roof. And, that's a bad thing that raccoon did. Well, from the raccoon's perspective, it smelled rotten wood, just as Peggy said, when a tree rots out and opens up, it creates cavities for the raccoons to live in. Well, when a roof is in disrepair, water can get underneath those shingles, they can get into the plywood. It's going to release an odor that to the female raccoon it's an invitation to, dig a little bit and move on in and have a nice warm place.
Yeah, all the heat coming out of the attic. Are you kidding? A
Yeah.
heat tree? Who gets one?
Yeah, it's almost like you've got a neon sign going, den here.
Right?
Vacancy. So a little eye towards maintenance will help prevent problems like that we see in the photo that's labeled nuisance. That is a huge problem. They're looking at probably thousands of dollars worth of repairs that are going to need to be done. But preventative maintenance might have been able to keep that from happening.
Definitely.
It's just
So
what they do. It wasn't random.
We're sitting at 11:50, Pam.
Okay.
And I know that after I just love, this is a sunset out here where I work on the way out of the forest, and I just love it. And we want you to not be discouraged by animals, to think of them and not tell people, they have to save everything, but to really have people think about these things. But Pam got something in the mail today. And I know it's a big jump, but everything that we talked about today will come for water. If there's a drought and you have bird baths out, take it from somebody who knows. If you have a bird bath on the ground and it's a drought, every wild animal in the neighborhood's going to come find that water in the middle of summer, especially if it's two skunks. And if you let your dogs out, things happen, right? The reason is water. Water is the absolute first and most important element to survival for all of us. And Pam has an interesting thing that the teachers might be.
Yeah, what would we be without water? And here in our northern Illinois climate, it is, what is it today, Peggy? 6 degrees out. It's very cold. In fact, a lot of the water that would otherwise be available for drinking is frozen. And animals, they're not going to take in a cold chunk of ice or cold snow, even though it'll melt in their mouth. They're going to have to use calories to heat up that water in order to be able to swallow it. And that's going to then have to look for more food to replace that energy. A very common practice around here, and I came in and I Zoomed with Peggy this morning, and I was just kind of grumpy because all over my shoes, all over our office floor is salt, rock salt that is used to keep our sidewalks safe. It melts the ice and it keeps people from slipping and falling. Same with our streets so that cars aren't crashing into each other. There's salt everywhere. Well, that salt washes down into our storm sewers. Those storm drains then let out into our local waterways. We here in St. Charles have the Fox River running right through the middle of town. There's a tremendous burden of chloride from that salt ending up in our waterways. And it's kind of up to us to keep track of that and make sure we're not poisoning, because once the salt is in the water, it's very hard to get rid of. Those of you who might have researched taking seawater and taking the chloride out to make it into drinking water, you'll know, very expensive process. Anyway, I was concerned about the salt here in St. Charles. I sent away to the Isaac Walton League for their winter salt watch kit. It's a free thing that you can do. It took about maybe 2 or 3 weeks for this kit to arrive. I went to the Isaac Walton League, ilwa.org. In their little search box, you can just type in winter salt watch. Type in your address. Teachers, this is might be a neat citizen science activity for you to perform with your students, or have them do that on their own over the weekend. But what it is it's these little test strips. Maybe if you've done some experiments with pH or other things, you've used test strips before. The kit comes with a card. You put some water in a cup. You let the test strip sit for about 10 minutes and you compare the results to what is on this card, and you know the chloride burden that your local waterways are carrying. It's just kind of a cool thing, and I thought it was kind of timely because in a way it does fit in with our wild lives, because what do we all share in common but this need for clean water?
Absolutely. So thanks everybody. I hope that wasn't too random. We have we love our wildlife. It's not,
we're just as random as they are.
Yeah, and we are the local science. We are I follow a lot of the people that come on this, the teach-in, and I'm just amazed and thought I was going to be one of those. But I do enjoy what I do for my community so much. And I have a lot of really great friends, some of them just putting on their cameras. So thank you for tolerating our crazy.
Actually, we were all just in our text stream saying we think you two should have a pod show. You guys need a podcast show.
We talked about doing it, but we didn't know if anybody cared.
You totally need to do it. That was so interesting. And I learned so many things. Sorry, my granddaughter is yawning in the background.
That's okay.
It's so interesting. And you guys always teach me something new. I didn't even think about the storm sewers being a travel path for mammals. I knew, sometimes salamanders, frogs, that kind of thing might use them if they connect to a riverway. But I had no idea that, mammals might do that. That's really interesting.
I have to be honest, when I saw those, I made a little video and I shared it with our public works department here in St. Charles to just get a sense of how frequent that is. And they said, oh yeah, they're there all the time. I actually found a muskrat that made a bad decision. It came up too soon. And it ended up getting run over because it had traveled quite a distance away from water through the storm sewers.
Oh, sure. And then,
yeah, there's a little conduit underneath.
Got off the subway at the wrong stop.
Yeah, right.
So I have because we only have a couple of minutes, but I have some questions for you guys. Yesterday was International Day of Women and Girls in Science, and all who identify as women and girls. And I'm wondering, we think about young Pam and young Peggy. How did you guys get here?
Well, Peggy, you want to start because my path was not direct.
I can. Somebody asked me once, my mentor said, how did you come to this? And I'm like, nobody's ever asked me that. When I was little in the 60s, my mother, I found out, used to put me in what would have been probably not a loud bouncy seat. It was probably like the unsafest thing you could put a kid in at the time. And she would put me out under a tree while she did dishes and just leave me there. My sister said it drove her nuts because she was afraid the neighborhood dog was going to take me. And then I spent a year on a farm. I was in a situation, and this isn't for empathy. My mother passed away when I was little, and we had just moved to a farm. So I was taken out of my home element, moved, and had to adapt. And I spent an entire year at 7 years old, and the farm came with a dog. And I think my grounding to the soil, to understanding, I didn't have the vernacular, plants. I knew what the plants were doing. I knew when they were growing. I knew if the snakes were dead and I hung them on my new stepmother's car handle, it would make a response, and I just ended up spending so much time on the earth, literally on the planet, I think. And then when I was, at some point when I was 11 or 12, I got student of the month, and it said, Peggy wants to work with animals or in a nature related field. So evidently, even though I didn't think about it, I really wanted to be an auto mechanic when I was like a freshman in high school. And it turned out I did what I thought I would do.
Well, it's funny, Peggy, very similar, well, actually very different, but the connection to the earth started for me. My earliest memories are looking for animals outside. I had this fascination that nobody in the family knew what to do with. They'd say, where did little Pammy go? Oh, she's in the backyard again. My grandmother, I only found recently that she'd made this up. There's a water collection. Old houses will have these things called cisterns where rainwater used to be collected, and that could be. Yeah. Well, Grandma told me that there were snakes in the cistern and I should stay away. What Grandma actually meant was, stay away from the cistern. I don't want you falling in there and drowning. Well, she told me that, and I would get the neighbor boys to help me pry the lid off so we could sit there and wait for the snakes to show up. I was not even 3 years old yet. So I had this internal drive to be with nature as much as I possibly can. It took me a long time to figure out how to make a career out of it. I actually spent about 15 years working for magazines, but anytime I wasn't in the office, I was outside chasing after one thing or another.
I was a kitchen and bath designer for a bunch of years. We like to
That's-
eat, you guys. We have to eat if we aren't.
Well, that's the thing, Peggy, auto mechanics put food on the table.
Cool.
But yeah, it's just been, I actually ended up meeting Peggy when I was in the process of making this career change into working for nature education. And Peggy and I met in our grad school class about 20 years ago now.
Oh, yeah. I don't want to talk
The
about it.
day before yesterday, I don't know. It's similar in my brain. But yeah, have not looked back, and I hope to continue to keep doing this for as long as I'm on this planet.
Well, you're both very gifted storytellers and you're very knowledgeable, and it's really, really, really fun to learn from you. And I'm sure it's just effortless. You guys are effortless teachers. So, maybe one day I will emulate you. You guys are awesome. So hope we can talk you into next year for the teaching, because everyone enjoys you. So
Thank you. We appreciate being asked a lot.
Very much. Glad to be here.
all right, well then with that, we're going to go to our next one. Appreciate you guys very much, and we'll talk to you soon.
Bye, everybody. Thanks.
Have a great weekend.
You too.